This is Leisha Holmes, and I'm your host on the Recruiters Recruitment Podcast. And I am really excited about today's guest, not least because we're going global, which is part of the main sort of privilege and honor for me as the host of this phenomenal podcast, which over the last few years has grown an audience, particularly in this part of the world, actually. I'm joined today by Chase Kocher, who is the founder and CEO of Aim4Hire, a business based over in Austin, Texas. And he's a born and proud Austinite, and I can't wait to hear all about it. Chase, welcome to you today. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I am really, really well. Thank you very much indeed. We've just been talking off camera about Austin, but I want you to tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why we're talking today.
Absolutely. So I'm based in Austin, Texas. I was kind of a unicorn. A lot of people have moved here from California, New York, a lot of the big, even Europe and Australia. I mean, it's become a tech attraction in a lot of ways because we have a huge tech startup community here. So attracts a lot of talent. We also have all the FANG, Facebook, Amazon, Google companies, Tesla, and Elon Musk are here as well. So a lot of appeal. Warm weather and Texas doesn't have the taxes that California has. So that's kind of one of the financial motives people tend to use. But myself, I played college or high school and college basketball. So I was an athlete, and out of college, I was trying to kind of find identity. I knew I wanted to be in the tech world. So I eventually really just fell into the recruitment space because I felt like having been an athlete, having been, seen people be recruited by schools and teams, I was like, okay, I can handle this. I can figure this out. And that way I can talk to all these smart tech people without having to know how to code and do all that kind of stuff. So that was kind of my justification there. And 4 years later, I ended up fortunate enough to kind of start my own firm. And we've got a team of about 15 tech recruiters in Austin working mostly with companies here, VC backed or like VC or private equity backed tech startups that are like super gritty, super hyper growth, super picky when it comes to hiring, which is great. But also as a recruiter, as I'm sure listeners know, it can be challenging. But that's how it is in a small company. You have to make the right hire every time when you're that small, and each hire make or break your company. So really that's kind of full circle.
I want to come and do your job. Your job sounds amazing. What a great intro and high energy. And we will come back to most of what you've just talked about in terms of what your business does in the market without a shadow of a doubt, because I think that's going to really appeal to so many of our listeners across the world here. But in terms, just want to ask you about your sporting career then. That's really, I've interviewed probably, I think by the time this goes out, probably about 150 leaders across the world. And I would say a good half of them have had some kind of sporting background. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I mean, we've hired a lot of former college and even professional athletes on our team. So like I see the value that, if you played a sport competitively, you kind of have some of the values that translate into a workforce. But just if you didn't play sports, it doesn't mean you don't. I think being a part of a team and understanding like it's not always just about you, it's about how do you make the team better? How do you work with others? And how do you work hard to see results? I mean, all the cliches, but I think something about athletes, they really buy into that. And so if you have an athletic background, it kind of gives, somebody that's interviewing you like a roadmap of like, well, they've proven that they can work hard and be successful and be a part of a team and so on and so forth.
Not being uninclusive at all, because I'm actually not an athlete and never was an athlete. I mean, it will surprise most people to know from my svelte figure. But actually, I think that what you're saying is it gives you an advantage. I think that when I've asked people that question before, I think that they respond with that, generally speaking, people who are successful in a sporting sense they understand that consistency is better than motivation, and that we all want consistent behaviors in recruitment, and then you're naturally competitive against yourself usually, as opposed to other people. So I think it's good behaviors, it's not bad behaviors.
Absolutely. No, and I think, it's one of those things where I think really it's a passion. I mean, if you have a passion for things outside of sports, then that's outstanding as well. And you can learn and apply all those skills. I think but sometimes athletes get tossed in a bucket of like, oh, you're a jock, good at sports, but not really, everything else. So, I mean, I think there's positives and negatives to all the stereotypes, probably.
Definitely. But let's definitely steer the conversation back to why you're coming on the show today. So you recruit in a very niche area, which is specifically high growth tech startup companies based in Austin who are VC and PE backed. What do you think the benefit of being so niche is to people listening?
You got to know. I think you've got to understand how and like what those smaller companies are going through and what they might be looking for and needing in certain cases. So I think being niche, I mean, when you're working for a bigger company, it's often more about volume. It's more about like, we need to get these 10, 15 slots filled. And we know that statistically every 20 resumes we get you generates 2 hires. So let's get you 40 resumes to get, 4 hires. It's kind of, I think it's less like that, and it's more boutique for smaller companies where they need the culture fit, they need the tech stack, they need the intangibles, and then willingness to maybe take less money and stock options or be a part of, take that risk and be a part of a small company that might not make it or might become the next big success. I think being niche, it obviously enables you to really specialize and be able to kind of speak to those things when you're recruiting candidates. I think when you're recruiting for small companies, you can't just send them a job description and the website. You kind of have to educate them on who the company even is, because more often than not, they've never heard of them. So that's kind of the responsibility that we see like recruiters kind of have for smaller companies. And I love it because it's kind of like fighting for the little guy or girl that's trying to compete with the big ones.
The David and Goliath scenario. I mean, I asked you that question, and there's a little bit of an agenda for me, because that's exactly what I am. I'm a niche. I'm rec to rec, and I do actually recruit across every industry, but I only recruit in the northwest of England. Very specific, very small geography, really. It's probably about a 30-mile radius, but most of my businesses from tech is startup businesses or companies that have got what I would call an embryonic feel about them. And what I'm just picking up on what you've said there is that as a recruiter partnering startup firms, whether it's tech like yourself, you become that brand ambassador for your client, and you just can then spot what that future talent looks like. So that's where your value is as a recruiter. That's why you should niche down. For the candidates, you are going to hear about opportunities that no one else is going to know about. They're not going to advertise. You wouldn't hear about them otherwise. And it's a shared risk, but it's high risk, high reward, isn't it? That's the thing with startup.
Absolutely. It's
we could do a pitch for each other, couldn't we, Chase?
we could. I think I'm picking up what you're putting down here. I think I'm all in with kind of your mentality, and that was that was my driver, is like, you could be one of 10, 20 recruiting firms working for a big company, and everybody's heard of Amazon and Google, and so when you're recruiting for them, you tell someone it's a job at Amazon, then that's it. That's all you really need to share. I mean, you could obviously share more about the team and department that it's on, but the small ones, I think those are the ones that kind of, you need to be a little bit more than just a job description recruiter that's just mass blasting messaging just to get responses.
I think that as we look at where the world is right now, I think that if you think you'd be safer in one of these larger companies, first of all, I bet you got a massive shock in October 2022 when everyone started making mass redundancies, Meta making these mass redundancies. So I think that there's a misconception that big means safe. I don't think that at all. But I also think that it's about the mindset of the individual. So presumably you get a very hard to find unicorn candidate. They're probably coming to you because they know that you're the expert and they want to make a difference and have an impact on their career, which we're not saying you can't do that in an Amazon or a Twitter, maybe not Twitter, or a Meta, but you're probably going to have more of an impact if it's somebody that you've not really heard of off the street.
Surely. And I think there's a trust, going back to end of last year, I think people are going to value trust. And, for a while, those big tech companies, you really didn't have to worry about job security. I mean, you obviously had to do your job, but you didn't have to worry about them running out of money or like starting to tighten the ropes. So that's a shift. And obviously startups really follow the trends that are set by those big tech companies, as far as benefits package, the salaries that are offered. I mean, they kind of set the bar for how the rest of the market has to operate. So with that being on their trust, I think it'll be a fascinating year to just see how companies hire, how competitive it is, and are the smaller companies able to compete more effectively or not? It'll be interesting.
I agree with you. So, I mean, given that we've been in a unicorn candidate-led market for the last few years, and certainly in skill-short markets, I presume within tech it's exactly the same across most STEM. How are you finding candidates? Where are you finding them? How are you delivering for your clients?
I think the big one is, and this is so hard as a recruiter, I get it, but like connecting with the people that were happy in their job, or they got back to you and said, I'm not looking. Still finding a way to still talk to them and stay in touch with them is just such a valuable way of building an actual network. If you're always just hitting the open to new ops candidates, and then it's just a surface level relationship. Here's your resume, toss it over, schedule an interview, get out of the way. It's so hard to really build a core competency and build kind of a baseline of candidates that you can trust and go to and ask questions. And whenever they're actually on the market, hopefully you're going to be one of the first people that hears about that. So it's long term, but it's tough, and I get it. Like, trying to stay in touch. But LinkedIn's obviously, I think, a powerful tool. It has its shortcomings, but I do think kind of thinking the picture, especially for smaller companies, you're not trying to place 1,000 people a year. You're trying to make 50 placements a year, or maybe 20 to 50. So having that big picture mindset of like, if I connect with this person, they're going to introduce me to their friends, and I can start kind of building a spider web of connections there.
I love that analogy. And I think it's really important to hear that from somebody like yourself that will be demographically, you'll be in tune with a lot of our audience. And I mean, I've said it for a long time. I've been doing recruitment for 25 years, but for me, the greatest success and the greatest sort of longevity in a niche market is not having a particular agenda when you connect to people. Certainly those candidates that you think they'd be amazing if they came in the market, don't make that your agenda. You just want to connect, you want to learn from them. You might not actually ever place that person, but I can guarantee they will recommend you to their mates. I promise you that. So it's really important to hear that from someone like you, because recruitment, I think, has got this reputation that we're connecting to you, and then you get this message back going, I don't want a new job, and you go, no, that's not why I'm connecting to you. Just want to build a network. So if we all do that, if we all say, look, we just want to connect, we just want to learn from you, it becomes less disingenuous and becomes more meaningful as a relationship. And of course, we all know that's how trust is built.
Absolutely. But like you said, I mean, so many, some of the bad egg recruiters might badger people so much that whenever you reach out as a recruiter, they're like, no, leave me alone. Like, I've got 100 other messages like yours. So I think that's where you have to try to find a way sometimes to get them on the, to provide value to them, to get their interest, to talk or be, connect on LinkedIn, whether it's just like sharing information about salaries, compensation. Absolutely. If there's anything relevant you can share, I mean, it's worth a shot. I mean, some candidates are going to come back and be like, yeah, I know what I'm worth. And in that case, like, okay, fair enough.
But they were doing a salary survey, or it could be, hey, I've just been a guest on a podcast in England. Hey, do you want to have a listen to me? But on a serious note, actually, you're not in-mailing them or messaging them with what every other recruiter is trying to get. I've got a job. Are you looking for a job? I think I'm so glad I asked you that question. That's really important. So, we have got a large swarm of our listeners who are quite new in their recruitment career, really. So they do drop in, and I'm so grateful to every single one of you that takes time to message me, because this is why we have the podcast, so you can learn, hopefully, take something away from this episode. So what if you were sat talking to maybe you when you started out, or you had an audience of just those newbie recruiters, what advice would you give to them in terms of making themselves valuable and attracting the right business for them?
Yeah. I mean, as an early recruiter, account man, whatever kind of job you're in within an agency or talent acquisition, I think the biggest thing is like, you can't lose sight of why you're doing it or why you might enjoy it. And I think you do have to have, I think you have to be competitive. You have to be willing to go through ups and downs, roller coasters of recruiting that we all know exist. But I do think at the core, there has to be a passion for working with people and companies, and you getting joy in either helping a company find the right people or helping the right person find a great job. Mm-hmm. So I think you're going to go through ups and downs and sideways doing recruiting. And if you don't have that North Star of this is why I'm doing this, maybe it's just career wise. I mean, that was kind of how I fell in, was I knew the recruiting industry, if you produce and you work hard, you tend to be able to move up pretty quickly. So that was the attraction to me. And I love people, and I love talking to smart people that are significantly smarter than me. So I just found a passion for like, hey, I'm going to learn about data science this week or this month, and I'm going to try to understand how tech stacks and backend developers are creating microservice architecture, like all of that stuff. Just like I had to learn how to like really appreciate and enjoy it, and enjoying learning about things I knew nothing about.
Yeah.
But you can't, you'll have 5 interviews that are final stage, and all 5 will get passed on. And then the next week you'll have 2 people at final stage, and both of them will get offers. And then they both don't take them because, the crazy stuff happens. It's human beings.
It's the roller coaster of recruitment. So I just want to go back to one thing you said there. 2 things. One, I love that you said that you find joy in what you do. To me, if you are doing this job and you don't find joy in the process, don't think about the outcome. Think about the process. You need to go and do something else, because life is far too short to do something that doesn't make you feel joy. And the second thing is, be more chase, be more curious, because what you've described there is curiosity. The voracious appetite you clearly have to understand. You're not going to go and be a data scientist. You're not going to go and be a tech stack developer, but you want to understand the jargon of it so you can add more value. I love what you've just said there.
Well, how cool is it that, I'm like I said, I'm just a jock that got a business degree in college, and and I'm talking to people that have, machine learning, patents and things that they've been building for 20, 30, 40 years. I just think it's fascinating, and I've grown to like it. I mean, as a basketball player, like tech wasn't necessarily the forefront on my mind of like, oh, I'm going to become a software expert. But I think obviously tech disrupts and is a part of almost everything. And I think that's obviously going to continue. So whatever your passion is, maybe find how tech is involved in that.
Well, let's face it, in about 5 years, we'd be recording this in the metaverse, wouldn't we? So,
That's right.
Austin,
scary thought.
You could come to Ramsbottom in the metaverse, although I'm sure you'd probably want to go to other places other than that. Now, I really appreciate that. And I think, actually, again, we get a lot of people who've taken jobs in recruitment and maybe they're not loving or feeling their sector. You don't necessarily need to be in a sector where you think, obviously, I'm going to be passionate. It's recruiting for people that are passionate about what they do. And I think that's when you tend to then attract clients and candidates that have that vibe too. So, I mean, maybe you didn't think you'd be recruiting in tech, but clearly the people you're partnering are passionate about what they're doing.
Right. And yeah, you don't have to fake a passion. I mean, I think if you don't enjoy talking to people, then recruiting, might not be best, but maybe there's other parts in the recruiting industry or, agency that you can contribute.
Sure.
I enjoyed the companies at first. So I did a lot of the biz dev and account management, and then, wanted to be talking more with people and got more on the recruiting side. So I think you can kind of find your spot, but obviously it takes hard work.
Yeah, finding your sweet spot takes hard work. It definitely takes effort and sweat. There's no question. So you're in a really privileged position where you're speaking to these amazing CEOs, CTOs, whatever they call themselves, COOs of tech startups. So what are they doing that leaders in recruitment can plagiarize? What can we do that they're doing well?
Yeah, I think every company based on their industry tends to have a different way. It's fascinating that there's so many startups, but they all seem to do things in their own unique, different way. I think there has been one thing I think is in building teams, and especially right now with the way the economy, at least in the States, has been, is that there's been this shift from growth mindset to profitability mindset, and kind of valuing shorter term wins versus playing the long term game because of just the way that things are. So I think a lot of them are kind of focused on like my core team and evaluating your team, and like knowing that if you've got 5 Michael Jordans on the same team, like that isn't always the best way to go. You need star players, but you need role players. You need people who are going to be willing to play defense and rebound. And I know I'm doing a basketball analogy there, but I think that's probably something. And then I think in a lot of ways, diversity finds its way into that, and how people are recruiting more with the diversity and inclusion mindset of bringing in different parts that can fit as a team and come together, versus just hiring, like, let's hire 10 people that all have 10 years of experience at Google. Like, they're all going to butt heads and never get along. Like, this is not always going to work.
That's really encouraging to hear, particularly that aspect, because that's something that certainly over here in the UK, we're echoing that, and that's within the recruitment industry. I think the narrative has really changed around that. But I actually thought you were going to go with it. I wasn't trying to lead you with the answer, but actually you're right. There is no one size fits all. You should follow your own path. I think that would be, if probably reading between the lines, maybe what you were going to say at the start of that. So we've just started a new year, 2023, although we are actually secretly recording this, it's still in 2022, but we're cheating. What do you think will happen? I mean, we tend to follow, UK follows America, and we're in a recession. I would always say focus on profitability, even in the heights of growth. Just focus on your profit always. What would your predictions be, if any?
There's a lot. I think the fund, especially if you're looking for venture capital funding or some type of outside investor, I think that game has shifted pretty dramatically. Where, like, I think prior, a lot of companies, if you had an idea and you had a background at Google or Amazon, like, someone was going to give you money to pursue a startup. Even if you may necessarily not be like entrepreneurial, you just kind of thought it was a good idea. And I think there was just so much money going around. Obviously, it's harder to raise capital right now. And I think with big tech letting people go and slimming up themselves, I think this year is going to be, I think companies are going to push back to the office as hard as they can. And I think you're going to kind of see a pendulum of who has the leverage. Is it the employee or employer or candidate or the company? And for a while in the tech space, it's been the candidate, and they've been able to dictate, I want remote, I want full benefits, I want the salary, I want the stock options. So I don't think it's necessarily going to shift completely, but I do think candidates, have to recognize that maybe like there will be less opportunities out there for them than they're accustomed to. And they're going to probably have to adjust to how the market, tends to go. And the compensation ranges might drop a little bit. The force back to the office might happen. Yeah. Inflation obviously is causing, with salaries and things like that. So I think those are kind of the factors I look to just for immediate, like, things I would anticipate in the next 3 or 4 months.
Yeah, I think that's all very wise. I think definitely manage your expectations if you're listening to this and you are potentially looking at a new job, whether you're a recruiter or not. I think that the shift has always been very balanced between candidate and client, even in candidate short markets, even when it's been boom, it still has to be right for the client. It still has to be right for the company. And I think, you're in a very dangerous position if you've put somebody over a barrel and broken their pay structure to come on board. You're the first person they're going to look at when they have to make decisions around, leaning up, which is the first point you make around being lean now. So what you're facing in your sector, I think, could have happened in 2020 across the globe, but furlough for most people protected that happening, because that's what happens in every recession. You lean up, you say, right, what's the return on investment on that person? So I think if you're listening to this now, don't panic. You don't need to panic, but you just need to make sure you are productive, that you are worth what you're being paid. And if not, then you might need to start thinking about maybe approaching your employees saying, look, maybe we should look at my salary and change the expectations and have a better commission. Maybe look at a sort of back end it rather than the front end of it. Just a suggestion. It's something that people have not been known to do. So if you come to them as the candidate, the employee, it actually, it resonates very well, particularly with startup businesses, because it's all about cash flow.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the right businesses, there isn't going to be this huge pendulum shift on leverage. I mean, leverage is a part of it. But I do think, the right companies are obviously going to value their people and try to put them in the best position and pay them what they're worth. But some, startups, especially, you have a limited number of money, a limited amount of money that you have that you can survive with. Right. So I do think that can be difficult. And then big tech doing a lot of, the layoffs, it's like, it'll be interesting to see if you've been making $250K base salaries, at Google, now Google's laid you off, are you willing to take less than 250K? Or are you going to hold out and see, if a company will match that at some point?
It's a problem. And then you take a job that's at, say, to use your example there, 150, but then in 6 months' time, there's a job advertised back up at 250. What do you do then? And what does the hiring client at 150 do? Do they offer the candidate knowing that they're going to probably move on? It's actually a real dichotomy of the sector. And just going back to your point about hybrid, I agree with your prediction. I think that more employees will need to see visibility. I think it's a shame, because I actually think that if you've created a workplace culture where people come to the office when they need to, if they need to, but I think the reality is you're going to need to see a much greater effort from people. And I suspect there'll be lots of companies that will get people back in. So,
and that might be a way small companies can compete with the big ones, is, you know, is offering that fully remote. Fully remote might become a perk again. I mean, for the last couple of years, it's kind of been the standard. That might become a perk or a benefit again. So a startup can use that as into their advantage to get somebody over, you know, but I guess we'll just have to find out. But those are some of the things that I would anticipate early on, but there's big shifts in the tech world. And so I think, you know, like sustainability and carbon footprints, I think the US is big on that. The semiconductor space, where the government here has done a lot of kind of ways to increase manufacturing and computer chips here in the US. So there's some bigger trends, but I think the immediate is like, how are candidates going to respond to less jobs, companies, you know, being tighter on compensation and their budgets. It should be interesting.
It should be, yeah. None of us should lose sight of the bigger picture around sustainability, environmental, climate issues, absolutely, you know, mental well-being, you know, talking about diversity and inclusion, all those big picture, absolutely, we don't lose sight of that. But in terms of the micro, we all need to look at the profitability and the return on investment. We are going to have to revisit this. You do realise that you have to come back on next year, you know, back end of this year, but beginning of next year. So you've just been a brilliant guest. And I imagine that there'll be a spike in Google search on Austin. So maybe you might even get some new people. That if you get an application from a 48-year-old woman from Ramsbottom called Alicia Holmes, don't be surprised. It's been so delightful. Thank you for joining us, Chase, on the Recruiters Recruitment Podcast.
Absolutely.